Welcome to the future of living. Now, you may have arrived at this presentation and expected it to be called the future of work. But let me paint a picture for you. Fast forward a century from now, historians that document this era will actually entitle this chapter The Future of Living. And there will be a footnote somewhere at the bottom that says society began to commune and live differently because we began to work differently. And that's what we're going to spend our time digging into today, the trends that are reshaping the modern workplace. Quick look at our agenda. First, I'm Darren. We'll dig into that in a minute. Then how to build healthy organizations, some of the trends that I see around the corner, some of the Darkhorse skills that you need to be aware of to upskill yourself, to make yourself maximally impactful in this new world of work. And we'll close with a peek inside the brain and how it operates in the workplace. I'm Darren. I'm a future of work architect and the former head of remote at GitLab, and I have spent my entire career building and leading teams across the distributed space, from fully in office to hybrid to fully remote. And I've learned a lot in that time, but one thing that has proven true across all organizations that are scaling is that they don't put as much intentionality in their virtual space as they do their physical space. Turns out there's a little bit of art and a little bit of science to getting that right. So we'll start by talking about how one goes about building a healthy organization. Now, there's a framework you need to understand before we dive into the mechanics of how this happens, and it's on the screen now. Distributed work is a product, not a policy. Now, why is this important? It's important because when you treat distributed work, or how work and collaboration happens across your team, across geographies, you're able to do things that no one else has ever done. So the photo up there in the top right, if you look in the middle, you'll see me holding out a phone, taking a selfie. And behind me is a board of my colleagues who are virtually joining from all around the world. Now, what you're seeing here is a capture of IPO day for a company called GitLab. GitLab became the first fully remote company to IPO when it did so in October of 2021. And I was there for almost 4 years. And what I found was a phenomenally progressive organizational design that actually captured the attention of Harvard and INSEAD, both of whom wrote case studies that are now being used to teach MBA students around the world. And it also caught the attention of McKinsey. McKinsey has a phenomenal study called OHI, or Organizational Health Index. And GitLab was the first to go through this survey with a fully remote infrastructure. And what the team found is that the organization that was built intentionally actually ranked in the top 10% of organizational health globally. It measured direction, culture and climate, accountability, coordination and control, capabilities, motivation, external orientation, and innovation and learning. Now, if distributed work were just a policy, it probably wouldn't look at all 8 of those dynamics in a deep and meaningful way. But when you see remote work or distributed work or hybrid work, whatever you're grappling with, as a product, you could look at those 8 axes and think, okay, what do we need to build to make sure that direction is well set? What do we need to build to make sure that culture and climate is where we want it to be? All of these elements are incredibly important. They're too important to leave to fate. It's way more important than a policy. So let's dig into what it means to tactically build product around distributed work. First, creating a strong culture is essential. And I believe that culture is defined by 3 key elements. The first is the operating principles and values. So these are the things that collectively there is a shared reality of what is valued and how people operate in order to collaborate and get work done. The second is camaraderie, formalizing both formal and informal communication to ensure that people can get to know one another for the humans that they are. And the third is how an organization works. Now, many organizations do not tie the tools and the codification of how those tools are used to creating a strong culture, but it turns out they are deeply connected. And the secret to making all of this work is looking at anything which is implicit or implied or learned via osmosis and codifying it, writing it down, making it explicit so that it can be easily shared across geographies, across languages, and it creates a baseline for people to improve upon. Now, I want to share a few tactical examples of systems that can be built to start to change the way that you think about building culture and building rapport in a distributed setting. The first is the community impact outing. And I think this is a phenomenal replacement for the Zoom happy hour that probably isn't aging too well in your organization. The way this works is very simple. You take the same hour that you would have spent in a Zoom happy hour, and you tell people that they can go into their local community, wherever they may be in the world, with 1 hour anytime during the week. Do something life-giving that's unique to them, and ask them to take a selfie while they're doing it. And then as a leadership group, create a forum for people to share those photos and videos back with the team. You'll be amazed at how people can bond, build rapport, build connection over shared interest. I'm often asked, how do you meet people or get to know people when you're starting in a distributed space? So I'll share a few tips here. The first is to create what I call a personal operating manual. Think of this as an operating guide to interfacing or working with you. How do you prefer to be communicated with? How do you prefer to receive feedback? What are your ideal operating hours during the day? Codifying that, writing it down, and then sharing it with teams that you're working with enables them to get a peek behind the curtain of what makes you you and how they can best adapt to interfacing with you. I'll also suggest that if you're leading a meeting, add a line at the top of the agenda that says connection before content. This is a simple phrase that acts as a reminder that when you're jumping into a work call, although there is work to be done, it behooves the team to first remember that connecting is important. Ask people how they're doing, how their weekend was. You can find icebreakers all over the internet. Remind yourself to use them. Stir the conversation about connection first, and then dive into the content or the work that's at hand. And the last tip that I'll share here is to push the boundaries of when work can happen. The nonlinear workday means that some of your work may happen in the morning, and then you may go address life for a bit, and then you may come back to work, and your workday may look more fluid or jumbled compared to the conventional workday. And as long as your team can work around you, and as long as you have the tools to make this possible, I would encourage you to experiment with this. Not everyone has the same peak productivity curve. Not everyone is built to thrive in a rigid 9 to 5. Experiment, test out different hours, see when your highest levels of creativity emerge. Now I want to talk a bit about what's around the corner and how you can prepare. This is one of my favorite stats to come out of Workplace during the pandemic, and it was ran by the Future Forum team in 2022. And they found that 79% of people wanted flexibility in where they work. And this is largely the rendition of distributed work that we are experiencing now. I call that the current frontier of distributed work. By and large, knowledge workers have figured out how to make work happen and how to make businesses thrive while still giving people geographic flexibility. But the next frontier of remote work, of distributed work, of hybrid work, is far more interesting. And that is shown in the stat below. 94% of those surveys wanted flexibility in when they work. But it's impossible to get flexibility in when you work unless you have systems and a culture and a team that enables that type of flexibility to happen. It really begins by taking a look at the Placeless taxonomy put together by my friends at Workplaceless. This is a phenomenal visual for understanding what tasks do we do every day that are more or less difficult to achieve asynchronously. Asynchronous engagements means that you're moving work forward without having two or more people in the same room or the same virtual room at the same time. And what you'll see here is that things like informing, collaborating, and problem solving, those are actually the least difficult to achieve asynchronously. But by and large, teams spend a lot of synchronous time together, informing one another, providing status updates, providing FYIs, when actually that time would be much better spent at the top of the pyramid, connecting, innovating, and making decisions. And what you have to realize is that we're all allotted the same 24 hours in a day. And if teams are using the most of those hours for things on the bottom of the pyramid, they don't have as much time to use where it's really important. So if you're trying to break through and ask your team to do things differently, or ask them, hey, could we challenge this meeting? Does it really need to be a meeting? I would say start here and consider the time that you're saving for connecting, innovating, and decision making when you're replacing it with different modes of working for elements that are at the bottom of this pyramid. What current future of work trends are going to become tomorrow's norms? Now, these elements here were derived from my research and what I've seen in studying organizations all around the world. And I actually believe that the future of work is going to become the future of living for reasons that I have explained so far. But I also want to talk a bit about documentation as a superpower. Companies that are rigorous about codifying their operating rhythms and principles, as well as their values, collective shared reality, it enables people that join their teams to onboard much more effectively, much more rapidly, and reach productivity in a much shorter amount of time. And I also want to look at this note at the bottom, zero tolerance for inefficiency in workplace systems. Increasingly, what I am seeing is that organizations are being held to a higher standard to make it easy for companies, for people to do work at the company. Think of it as an interface. Employees are interfacing with the organization, and they've become used to operating their phones and their computers and their other digital devices in a very seamless way. And they're beginning to have those same expectations of organizations. And so it raises the standards, it raises the expectations on the systems, the workflows, and the culture that is built in an organization to make it easy for people to do great work within that organization. What am I excited about? What will work look like in 5 to 10 years? Well, we can't be certain, but I do think that remote work or distributed work will increasingly be known as simply work or modern work. All companies at scale end up being distributed to some degree. Some amount of work happens across borders, across time zones, and across geographies. And so it's less about what identity is my company. Is it an in-office company or hybrid company or remote company? It's much more about understanding the reality that work happens globally. Work happens across the internet, fortifying your infrastructure to ensure that you have durability and resiliency in the system such that work can happen across those geographies is really important for the future of organizational trust and performance. Let's dive into some of the Darkhorse skills, some of the skills that you need to be maximally effective in the future of work. Now, this is one of my favorite studies to come out of the pandemic, and it's an article from McKinsey, and the headline is just perfect. If we're all so busy, why isn't anything getting done? It's an excellent piece, but I do want to pull out one line in particular. McKinsey quoted, "Here is the underlying disease, the poor design and execution of collaborative interactions." And I thought this went really well with a quote from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, who wrote, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And so what McKinsey found is that collaborative infrastructure is absolutely critical for people feeling like they belong, for people feeling like their culture is worth writing home about, and for people to show up excited, passionate, and engaged about the work that they're doing. So, what can you do to prepare for the workplace of tomorrow? It starts with becoming a storyteller and becoming a low context communicator. Now, let me define this term for you: low context communication. It means that you communicate in a way that you assume your colleagues or peers have no to low context about the situation at hand. Most people have some degree of high context communication, as in they assume that the person on the other side understands their point of view. But things shift when you say, I need to communicate in a way as if this person doesn't know anything about this project. Or perhaps I need to communicate in a way so that they can loop themselves into the project if they are to join midstream. When you take a more empathetic and deliberate approach about how you structure your own communication, you begin to break down information silos. You begin to pull people together and infuse a shared reality where there can be a higher velocity of decisions with deeper conviction. I want to close here with a couple of slides on the psychology of work. Now, this stack here, this top 5 list, came from a study at Google in 2015, where they looked at the 5 elements that were necessary to build an effective and dynamic team: psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact. And I want to spend a bit of time looking at that third layer: structure and clarity. What I find is that in distributed settings, this is the layer most likely to be missing or very weak. If you put 2 people in a room and you ask them, what does success look like? Will you get the same answer from both individuals? If the answer to that is no, I would start by looking at the structure and the clarity. Do people have a clear understanding of vision, of strategy, of what success looks like? Do people have a clear understanding of what tools are used, in what order, and in what way in order to progress and make work happen? Do people have clarity and understanding on what people's roles are and how teams interface and interact with one another? If you ask a broad group of people, you'll generally get laughs or rolling of eyes, because the truth is a lot of organizations move so fast that it doesn't feel like there's time for structure and clarity. But when you make time for structure and clarity and you create team agreements, you then create a shared understanding where things can go much, much faster. Now, an interesting footnote here from this study: the researchers discovered variables that were not significantly connected with team effectiveness at Google. And the first one here is co-location of teammates, or sitting together in the same office. This is a fascinating discovery because remember, this was in 2015, well before most of the world were wrapping their minds around distributed work, well before tools and infrastructure, structure and clarity around how to work in a distributed way were pervasive. And yet, sitting together in the same office was found to not be significantly connected with team effectiveness. I think this is a very powerful stat if you are sitting on a team where you're trying to persuade a broader group of people to think about how work happens in a different way. Lastly, I want to share another book, Your Brain at Work by Dr. David Rock. This is a fascinating look at how people's minds work within the confines of the workplace. The entire book is worth a read, but I want to pull out one model and framework in particular. Dr. David Rock studies the neuroscience of how minds work within the workplace. And he found that in almost every scenario, people are moved toward, as in they're getting closer to a reward, or they're moved away, they're threatened by these 5 different axes: SCARF: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. If you're a workplace leader and you are architecting policies or procedures, it is vital to consider that when you deploy those changes, it will impact people on these 5 areas. How will it impact their status? Will they be certain of the vision and the strategy that you're laying out? Will it positively or negatively impact their personal autonomy, their personal agency? Can they relate to it? Does it feel like something that they want to be associated with? And will it feel fair to them? Now, in leadership, it's impossible to please everyone at all times, but it is very powerful to know that whatever you put forward, it will be viewed through this lens across the team. And there's a lot that you can do from a narrative and messaging standpoint, and also inviting people in early in the process to get their point of view, to feel like they have some autonomy, that they can relate to the process, and at the very least, the decision-making flow was fair. The last thing I want to encourage you here is if you are architecting a team workshop, remember that it is key for you to design an environment where people have more aha moments than ah duh moments. Create an environment where they are inspired, that they can write new neural pathways in their minds as they are discovering the path forward. The best policy in the world, even if it is closely tracked and followed, feels a bit like an ah duh moment. It could be well understood, but it might not galvanize or inspire a team to action. But the aha moments, those are the ones that make people want to rally together and to build a better future together. Thanks for the time today. I would love to stay connected. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm Darren Murph, as well as at darrenmurph.com. Godspeed, and let's build a better future together.